My name's Eric. I'm not from the Upper Peninsula originally. I grew up downstate, and I'm one of those guys who only started appreciating the North once I got older and stopped needing a reason to be out late besides a bar. My girlfriend Megan and I used to do these weekend getaways when work let up. 2 nights somewhere quiet, cook our own food, sleep too much, and come home feeling like we'd actually been off the clock. This happened in late November a few years back, right around the first real snow that sticks. We rented a small cabin near the Marquette-Alger County line. I'm keeping the exact spot vague on purpose. It's not because I think anyone's going to hunt for the thing we saw. It's because I still drive through that area sometimes, and I don't want to know if I'm passing the same turnoff. The reason I'm writing it now is simple. I've told the story a handful of times, usually after somebody has had a couple beers and starts talking about Bigfoot or weird sounds in the woods. People laugh, or they get quiet and change the subject. Either way, they keep doing the same dumb things. Walking a dog at night on the edge of the woods, leaving food on a porch, renting a place that's basically a lit box in the middle of black timber, and assuming locked doors mean anything. I used to assume that too. We got up there in the afternoon. Gray sky, cold enough that the air stung, and that heavy stillness you get right before snow. The cabin was one of those basic places. Wood stove, a little electric baseboard heat, a mudroom entry with hooks on the wall, and one bedroom off the main space. No neighbors in sight, just pines, birch, and a line of dense forest where the ground dropped away. It looked normal. It smelled like every rental cabin smells. Old smoke in the boards, cleaner, a little mildew in the corners. We unloaded, put groceries away, and did the usual routine of checking the place over. I always do that, not because I'm paranoid, but because I don't like surprises. Doors lock, windows latch, smoke detector. You learn to do it after you've stayed at a couple of places where rustic really meant nobody has touched this since 1987. The wooden door was solid and had a deadbolt. The windows were those older crank-out kind in the living room and bedroom. They latched, but the frames were a little loose, which isn't unusual. The mudroom door was more of an interior door, thinner, and it only had a knob lock. Megan made a joke about being in a horror movie when she saw there was no Wi-Fi and no phone reception. I told her that was the point. Quiet weekend, no scrolling. She laughed and said, "Yeah, until we get murdered." We cooked dinner, drank a couple of beers, and snuggled up on the couch. By 7, it started snowing in that lazy way where each flake looks big and slow under the porch light. It wasn't a blizzard, just steady, fat flakes that softened everything. Around 9, we took a few things out to the truck. Extra cooler, a bag we'd forgotten, that kind of thing. I remember stepping out and noticing how dark it was away from the porch. The light didn't go far. It made a bright patch on the steps and then died. Past that was just black woods and the soft swish of snow falling. I did a quick scan out of habit. Nothing. No distant lights, no movement. You could hear the highway far off if you listened hard, but mostly it was just wind and trees. We came back in, turned the porch light off, locked up, and settled in. Megan took a shower, and I fed the fire. Sometime after 10, I noticed the cabin had gone very quiet, the way it does when the usual night sounds aren't there. No owl calls, no little scratchy mouse-in-the-wall noises, just the fire and the wind. I didn't say anything because if you start verbalizing every uneasy thought you have, you turn a weekend into an argument. But I remember thinking it felt like the woods were holding their breath. We went to bed around 11. The bedroom was small, a bed against one wall, a dresser, and a chair in the corner with an extra blanket. There was a window on the wall next to the bed, looking out toward the tree line. We turned off the lights, and the room went black. Sometime during the night, I woke up to tapping. At first, my half-asleep brain tried to make it into something normal. Ice settling, a branch flicking the siding, but it had a pattern. Not a loud bang. More like someone touching the wall with a knuckle. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. I lay there and listened, trying not to move too much. Megan shifted beside me. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Probably a branch," I whispered back, even though I wasn't sure. The tapping came again, slightly lower and closer to the mudroom side. I reached for my phone, more out of instinct than because I planned to do anything with it. The screen lit up my hands. No service. I turned the brightness down immediately, like I was hiding it from something. Then the door handle moved. Not the main door, the mudroom door. We were in the bedroom, and I couldn't see it, but I heard it through the open bedroom door. A soft click, the sound of someone testing a knob slowly, carefully, not rattling it. Just pressure, then release. Megan grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Eric," she said, her voice tight. "That's not the wind." I didn't answer. I was listening for it again, hoping I was wrong, hoping it wouldn't happen again. It did. This time, the pressure on the handle was heavier. The knob turned far enough that I heard the latch shift, then stop. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side seemed to realize it wasn't going to open and let go. I sat up slowly. Megan sat up too, eyes wide, face pale in the faint window glow. The sound stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the stove's faint crackle in the other room. Then it came again, from a different spot. A slow scuff along the exterior wall, like something brushing the siding. Not quick, not frantic. It sounded almost methodical. It went from the mudroom area toward the front of the cabin, where the living room window was. I could picture it without wanting to. Megan mouthed, "What is that?" Her voice wouldn't come out. I started to get out of bed, then froze. I had no plan. We were unarmed. I didn't even have a pocket knife on me. I'd left the truck keys out in the main room. If it were a person, confronting them half-naked in a dark cabin with no weapon and no way to call for help was the dumbest move imaginable. If it were an animal, well, I couldn't make animal fit what we'd just heard at the door. The tapping started again, but different. This time it was on the glass. It wasn't a bare paw thump. It was a sharper sound, like nails, followed by a slow scrape that made my teeth hurt. You know the sound of a fork dragging across a plate? Like that, but on a window. Megan slid out of bed on the far side and crouched low. She looked at me and then pointed down, like she was asking me to get lower too. That's when my brain finally did something useful. I killed the bedside lamp switch, then remembered we'd already turned the lights off. Still, the act of reaching for it snapped me into focus. Hide. Don't make noise. Don't let it hear movement. We got down on the floor behind the bed, pressed into the narrow space between the bed frame and the wall. It wasn't a perfect hiding spot, but if someone took a glance through the bedroom window, they wouldn't see us right away. We were basically curled up like kids playing a dumb game, except neither of us believed it was a game. The tapping on the window stopped. I heard another sound then, very faint but unmistakable once my ears found it. Breathing, not loud panting, more like slow exhaling through a nose close to the wall, then a short huff, like something scenting. A few moments later, the bedroom window began to fog on the outside, just a smear of condensation on the glass. Megan's nails dug into my wrist. Her whole body shook in tiny bursts. I tried to slow my own breathing, but it felt like my chest wanted to hammer loud enough to give us away. And then it looked inside. A shadow filled the window at first, just a dark mass against the gray night, more suggestion than detail. The lighting was terrible. There was some moonlight, enough to thin the darkness a little since the moon was full and the clouds weren't completely closed in. But most of what I was seeing was filtered through glare on glass, falling snow, and my own fear. The shape moved slightly, and then the outline of a head slid into view, close enough that it didn't have to crane or stretch. I want to be clear here. I'm describing this as honestly as I can, but a lot of it was dark on dark, my brain trying to make sense of partial information. What I remember most clearly is the shape of it, a clear muzzle, or what looked like a muzzle, canine in profile, but heavier and wider at the front than any animal I've ever seen, ending in a flat, dark nose that pressed against the glass. Not pointy like that of a dog or a bear, flat and set higher on the muzzle. What didn't make sense to me, even in that moment, even with adrenaline screwing with my perception, was the height. That bedroom window was set high. The sill was already a few feet off the ground outside, and the top of the glass was well over 6 feet. The head wasn't down low like a dog stretching up. It was up near the top portion of the window, as if whatever it was had brought its face level with the upper pane. I couldn't see anything braced against the siding, No paws on the glass or on either side of the window frame. No dark shapes leaned against the wall like front legs propping it up. Just a head, and that huge muzzle pressed close enough to fog the pain. That's where I have to admit the limits of what I know. Maybe it was standing on something I couldn't see. A stump, a buried rock, or drifted snow piled up against the foundation. Maybe I'm misjudging where exactly it was in relation to the glass, because of the angle and the way the moonlight was hitting. All I can tell you is how it read from the floor. Looking up, too high to make sense. The profile was wrong in a way that's hard to describe without sounding dramatic. It had the length of a canine skull, but the proportions just didn't fit any creature I can think of. When it shifted, I saw the edge of an ear, pointed, upright. That supported the canine theory. It turned its head slightly, as if it was trying to look around the room, not just peek into it. I could see teeth when its lips pulled back a fraction, not a snarl exactly, more like it was tasting the air. The teeth were long and almost shiny, bright against dark fur. The fur itself looked wet or clumped from snow. Dark, almost blending into the night, except where the moonlight hit it at just the right angle to throw a faint sheen on it. The head moved with a steadiness that made my stomach drop. It wasn't frantic or confused. It acted like it knew exactly what it was doing, like it had done this before. Megan made a small sound, barely a whimper, more like air catching in her throat. The tension was slowly turning into fear. The head snapped back toward the bedroom, toward where we were, even though it couldn't see much of us. That motion was fast, not a slow animal curiosity. A quick, sharp turn, like it had heard exactly what it needed. My head was just high enough for my eyes to look over the edge of the mattress. My hair was dark, and I was completely still. There was no light whatsoever inside the room. I stopped breathing. Megan's eyes were closed. She pressed her mouth against her sleeve like she could smother the sound that way. The head stayed at the window for a long few seconds. Its nose moved, tiny shifts. I watched it contract against the glass. I couldn't see the eyes at all. It tapped the glass again, twice, right where the muzzle had been. The sound was a hard click, claws, then another slow scrape down the pane, leaving a faint streak as if something dirty or wet had dragged over it. It moved away, and for a moment I thought it was gone. Then we heard it again on the porch. Not heavy stomping, just weight shifting on the boards, a soft groan as the porch flexed. I realized it had moved to the main door, the one I'd checked when we arrived, the solid one with the deadbolt. That door felt real in a way the mudroom door didn't. Thicker, sealed better, built to keep weather and other things out. I quietly snuck out of the bedroom so I could get eyes on the door. Megan stayed behind, still cowering on the floor next to the bed. Just like earlier at the mudroom door, it tested the doorknob first. Not a frantic rattle like a drunk, but a careful, methodical approach. Pressure, turn, release. Then again, with more force. I heard metal click, first the knob latch giving what it could, and then the blunt stop of the deadbolt holding. It stayed there for a beat, as if whatever was out there was doing the math like it could feel the difference between a cheap door and a proper one. The knob turned again and held longer, with that same steady, controlled force. The door didn't open. The deadbolt did its job, but the fact that it tried the doorknobs at all, tried it like that, made my stomach roll. It wasn't guessing. It wasn't just swatting at whatever was in reach. It was working its way around the cabin, trying the most obvious entry points, and then coming back with a little more intention each time. At that point, Megan began to lose it. She started to cry, quiet at first. The kind of crying you try to swallow so you don't make noise, but it kept leaking out of her anyway. Little broken sounds in the back of her throat, air catching, her breath stuttering like she couldn't decide whether to hold it or let it out. She kept making these tiny, involuntary whimpers, and every time she did, she'd clamp her hands tighter over her mouth like she could shove the sound back in. I knew she was trying hard not to hyperventilate. I eased back toward the bedroom, keeping my feet flat so the floorboards wouldn't pop. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't even have my phone in my hand anymore. Just this useless awareness that I was the only thing between her and whatever was outside. I slipped in through the doorway and knelt beside the bed where she'd folded herself up on the floor, her back to the mattress, her face pressed into her sleeves. The bedroom window was on the other side of the bed. I put an arm around her shoulders and pulled her in tight. "Hey," I whispered, as close to her ear as I could get. "Look at me. Breathe with me. In through your nose. Slow." She tried. I could feel her ribs hitching against my forearm, her breath coming in little choppy pulls that she couldn't smooth out. I kept my hand over her forearm like a weight, not to pin her, just to give her something solid. Behind us, the noises at the front door had stopped entirely. At first, I thought that meant it had finally given up. Then I heard it move, the porch boards letting out a low, drawn-out creak, like a heavy weight moving away from the door. A second creak followed, then another, moving along the porch toward the corner of the house. It wasn't running. It was walking off the porch with the same controlled pace it had used on the doorknob. I squeezed Megan a little tighter. She made another small sound, and I felt her muscles go rigid as if she realized what I was realizing. There was a gap of a few seconds of absolute silence. No scratching, no footsteps. Then the bedroom window exploded. The sound was a sharp, violent pop followed by a spray of glass that hit the floor and the bed frame like thrown gravel. Cold air rushed in, and with it came a burst of snow and a raw, wet animal smell, musky and rank, like a kennel that hadn't been cleaned in months. Megan screamed before she could stop herself. I lurched up, instinctively angling my body towards the window. In the broken frame, a dark shape leaned in. I couldn't see clean details, just mass and motion, massive shoulders crowding the opening as it tried to force its way through. I heard a low growl. The sound wasn't like a dog warning you off. It was slower, deeper, and rougher, like the lungs of this thing were several times bigger than those of a dog. The creature pushed again, and the remaining glass crackled under it. Something scraped hard against the sill, either claws or nails on wood, and I saw the muzzle come in through the opening, thick and blunt at the end, flecked with snow. It was trying to squeeze itself through a space that wasn't made for it, forcing the frame to flex. The broken edges of glass made a faint tinkling noise as it shifted, and I remember thinking, stupidly, that it was going to cut itself up and not care. "Move," I hissed at Megan, loud enough to cut through her panic. I grabbed her wrist and hauled her up. We didn't stop to put on our shoes. We didn't grab our luggage. I even left my phone on the nightstand. We bolted out of the bedroom as the growl rose and the frame groaned again behind us. I slammed the bedroom door shut on our way out. The second it closed, I recognized the problem. There was no lock on that door. It was just a cheap interior door with a knob, the kind you could open with 2 fingers when you were drunk. It wasn't even fully latched because the frame was old, and the door didn't sit perfectly. I threw my shoulder into it and heard the latch finally catch. Megan was crying openly now, making these breathless, shocked sounds like she'd been punched. I got her behind me and backed us into the living room, trying to think fast while my brain kept replaying the window bursting. Behind the door, something moved. The bed frame creaked. Wood groaned under weight. It was inside. I held the knob with one hand and braced my forearm against the door, putting my weight into it. The wood was thin. I could feel it flex already, just from my own weight pressing against it. Megan grabbed my sleeve with both hands, her fingers cold and tight, like a kid hanging on in a crowd. "Keys," I whispered, keeping my mouth close to her so I didn't have to raise my voice. "Get the truck keys, now. Go to the front door." I didn't explain. I didn't have time to explain. The only plan I could form was to get us out of that cabin. For a second, she just stared at me like she couldn't translate words into action. Then I could see her force herself back into her body. She let go of my sleeve and moved toward the little table by the entry where we'd dropped our stuff. I heard keys clink softly as she grabbed them, and then she hovered by the front door, one hand on the knob, waiting for me. I knew that creature would be on us in no time if it came through that door, so I stayed where I was and kept my hand on the knob in sheer desperation. Then the knob in my hand started to turn. It wasn't a violent jerk. It was the same steady pressure I'd noticed on the other doors earlier, controlled, patient, like it understood leverage. I held onto the knob with all my strength, and pushed myself harder against the door with my shoulder, trying to keep it closed by sheer weight, but it was no use. The knob kept turning. Something hit the door from the other side. Not a punch, not a kick. More like a full-body shove with too much mass behind it. The door swung into me, and the force of it ripped my hand off the knob. I went sideways, almost flying backward into the living room. My heel caught the edge of the rug, and I went down hard, shoulder and hip slamming into the floor. For a second, all I could hear was my own breath and the rush of blood in my ears. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I tasted that coppery, shocked taste you get when you bite your tongue without realizing it. I saw Megan open the front door. Then I finally looked back at the bedroom doorway. A huge, hunched figure was moving into the living room. It didn't come in like a person walking through a doorway. It flowed in, shoulders forward, head low, and it filled up the space in a way that made the whole cabin feel smaller. The light in there was awful, just the dim wash from the open front door and a little gray from the snow outside, reflecting the moonlight. I couldn't make out clean details. I couldn't tell you the exact color of its fur or where its eyes were. It was mostly shape and motion, and the certainty that something large and dangerous was in the room with me. I did what people do when they're cornered, and their brain runs out of options. I scrambled to get back on my feet, then reached for the first heavy thing I could spot in the near-total darkness. There was a cast-iron pan on the stove, an old one, big and heavy. I grabbed it by the handle like a club, half expecting it to be slick with grease, turned around, and swung as hard as I could at what I thought was a head. The pan hit with a deep, ugly sound, metal on bone. The head snapped sideways and down under the impact, and the heavy breathing I'd been hearing turned into a sound I'll never forget. Not a bark, not a growl. A scream of pain, raw and high enough that it didn't match the size of what I was looking at. It echoed in the little cabin and made Megan make a strangled noise outside on the porch. That hit didn't drop it. It didn't even really slow it the way you want to believe a cast-iron pan will slow something. But it bought me the half-second I needed to get to the open front door. Megan had left it open when she ran outside and was still standing on the porch with the truck keys clenched in her fist, and her face turned toward me like she couldn't decide whether to run or wait. I yelled for her to get to the truck while I scrambled for the doorway. Just as I passed through, I remembered the axe. When we'd come in earlier, the first thing I did was chop firewood. I was in a hurry, so I leaned the axe against the wall out on the front porch instead of putting it away. The moment I stepped outside, I saw that it was still there. I didn't think about what I was doing. I just grabbed it and turned around. The creature was already coming for the doorway. It moved faster than it should have for something that had just been struck across the head by several pounds of iron, and it came low, arms leading, like it meant to grab me or slash me with its claws. I stepped sideways, away from the doorway, and angled my body towards it. That way, it couldn't immediately reach me with its claws when it came out. Then I lifted the axe high above my head with both hands and waited for the thing to come through the doorway. I brought it down just as its extended arms came into sight. The timing was perfect. By the time the blade came down, the creature's upper body had crossed the threshold. The impact was brutal. The blade hit with a solid thud that I felt up my arms. It wasn't just flesh, it was bone. I felt it the way you feel a maul bite into a log. Resistance, then a hard stop, and then it screamed again. That second scream was even worse than the first, higher and louder, like it had more air behind it, and it carried out into the trees and across the snow. Immediately, the figure recoiled, pulling back into the cabin as if the doorway suddenly burned. The axe didn't stick. My hands had gone numb from the shock of the impact, and I had let go of the handle after the blow. I didn't wait around to assess the damage I had done. The moment it retreated inside, I turned around and ran towards the truck. The engine was running, and the headlights were on. Megan was in the driver's seat. I expected to hear it behind me immediately. Footfalls, the porch groaning, something crashing through snow. I didn't. I heard banging from inside the cabin, like it had slammed into something or was tearing the place apart, but didn't see it again. Megan fishtailed the truck right away. The driveway, if you can call it that, was just packed snow over dirt, and the tires spun before they found anything. The back end slid toward the trees, and for a second, I thought we were going to put the truck into a pine before we even made it back to the track that led from the highway to the cabin. Megan corrected too hard, then corrected again, and we swung the other way, headlights bouncing over trunks and branches like a strobe. "Slow down," I shouted, but it wasn't a command. It was a plea. She was shaking so badly that her hands on the wheel looked like they belonged to someone in withdrawal. She kept her foot in it anyway, because slowing down felt like dying. We hit the little forest track that led out toward the main road and almost slid right off it, front tires skimming the edge where the ditch dropped. The truck caught, lurched, and then we were straight again, moving twice as fast as we should in those conditions. I kept looking in the side mirror for a dark shape running after us, but all I saw was snow and darkness. We made it out eventually. It took miles before my hands stopped shaking. It took longer for Megan to stop crying, and even then, she wasn't really present. She was just driving like a machine, eyes locked on the narrow strip of road in our headlights. Neither of us said anything about what had attacked us in that cabin. We found a gas station that was still open. Megan sat in the truck in the lot for a minute with both hands on the wheel, breathing as if she'd just run a mile. When her phone finally showed a couple of bars, I called the sheriff's office and reported an animal attack on the cabin. I didn't give details. I kept it simple. Large animal, broken window, forced entry. 2 deputies met us there and followed me back out. Megan wouldn't come. She stayed at the gas station, staring at the store windows like she was waiting for something to step out of the dark. Even with headlights and 2 uniforms in the truck behind me, that drive back felt like a bad decision. The cabin looked the same from the road, sitting there in the snow as if nothing had happened. Inside, it wasn't as much of a mess as I had feared. Blood on the floor in the living room, glass everywhere in the bedroom, the window frame chewed up and bowed, the bedroom door hanging crooked in its loose jamb. But that was it. The deputies walked through with flashlights, careful but casual in the way people get when they've already decided what they're looking at. One of them said "bear" almost immediately. He pointed at the broken window and the torn trim and said bears will do that if they smell food or get curious. I didn't argue. I just nodded and went straight for my phone and our bags. The deputies didn't find much beyond the damage and some smeared tracks in the snow that could have been from any large animal. They took my statement, gave me a report number, and that was that. The report number was what eventually protected me from having to pay for the damage. The owner's insurance took care of it. On the drive home, Megan finally said, very quietly, it wasn't a bear. I didn't answer because I didn't have anything better to offer. We never got a good look at it. All we had were memories of a huge frame, a canine-like head, its ability to open doors, and those awful screams. I'd heard people mention the Michigan Dogman before, usually as a joke or a song or something you bring up around a campfire when you want to freak someone out. After that night, it stopped being funny. Call it whatever you want. I don't claim I know exactly what it was, and I'm not interested in arguing about names. I just know there's something huge and dangerous on the loose in the Upper Peninsula, something that isn't a black bear.